Welcome to the deep dive. We're diving into Mark Manson's The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Feck today.
Oh, yeah, it's a book that kind of shakes things up when it comes to, living a good life.
Exactly. And we'll be pulling out the most interesting bits from your excerpts.
Trying to figure out how it all applies to, you, the listener.
It really is refreshing, isn't it? How he doesn't shy away from the tough stuff.
Yeah, instead of just, promising all sunshine and rainbows, he goes right into the reality.
That life is messy and challenging. He uses Charles Bukowski as a case study, which is interesting.
Bukowski, now he's a great example.
Right, like someone who found success, but,
On his own terms, totally. He was rejected for years.
Oh, yeah.
His writing was called horrible, disgusting, all that.
Wow.
But he just kept writing, He didn't let it stop him.
It's kind of amazing when you think about it.
Didn't get his big break until he was 50.
50. It makes you think, maybe all those years of what we call failure.
Yeah, maybe it was fuel, for his eventual success.
And that seems to be one of Manson's main points.
Right.
That constantly chasing...
The positive.
Yeah, only good vibes that could actually...
backfire. Yeah, I think he's saying that when we're always trying to be what we're not, it kind of reinforces the idea that we aren't good enough right now.
Oof, that's deep. It's like if you're always focused on a better you in the future.
What are you saying to yourself now, in this moment?
It's a really good question to ask yourself.
Yeah, it is.
And it makes me wonder if all that striving, always trying to be...
if it's a trap. A negative feedback loop?
Exactly.
Manson calls it, wait for it, the feedback loop from hell.
Okay, I like that.
Feel bad about something, then you feel bad for feeling bad, and bam!
Down the rabbit hole you go.
Spiral.
It can feel so hard to escape that loop.
Especially these days with,
social media.
No, yeah, it's like you're always seeing everyone else's highlight reel.
Exactly. And it just makes your own struggle seem so much worse.
Yeah, it makes it harder to be okay with, just being normal.
Right. Not perfect, not crushing it all the time.
Because it's not just social media, right? It's like there's this pressure from society.
Always achieving, optimizing. Yeah.
But what if, and I know this sounds crazy, we just stopped giving a feck?
Okay, hold on. Are you saying we should just give up on everything?
Yeah.
Become totally apathetic?
No. It's not about giving up. It's more about...
Okay, good, because that sounded kind of bleak.
It's about realizing that some things are just not worth the emotional energy.
Okay, that makes more sense.
We spend on them. It's about choosing your battles.
So how do we figure out which battles to fight?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Right. What's worth giving a feck about and what should we just let go of?
Manson says, and this is going to sound weird, that suffering is actually biologically useful.
Wait, hold on. Suffering. Useful. How?
I know, right? It sounds crazy. He has this great metaphor, though.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
The disappointment panda.
Disappointment panda. I love it already.
Right. Imagine a superhero panda, but this panda tells you the hard truths, the stuff you don't want to hear.
Like a tough love kind of panda.
Exactly.
Okay, so how does this panda help us with suffering?
Well, the disappointment panda's job is to remind us that setbacks, they're going to happen.
Right, that's life.
And that they can be opportunities for growth.
I'm starting to see where you're going with this.
Think about a time when you had a major disappointment, a job loss, a relationship ending.
Ugh, yeah, those are tough.
Terrible at the time, but did it eventually lead to something better?
I guess some of my biggest disappointments did force me to, reevaluate things.
There you go. That's the disappointment panda at work.
Nudging us towards growth, even if it's painful at first.
Exactly. Because we learn from our struggles,
So instead of trying to avoid discomfort all the time, we should actually embrace it.
It's not about actively seeking out suffering, of course.
Right, that would be masochistic.
But it's about recognizing that it's part of life.
And that it can serve a purpose.
Manson uses the Buddha's journey to enlightenment as an example. Remember.
Yeah, the prince who gave up everything.
To seek truth through suffering.
So are we all supposed to become monks now?
No, not at all. The point is that suffering is inherent to life.
It's going to happen no matter what.
Exactly. The key is how we relate to it. Manson believes happiness comes from...
solving problems, not avoiding them.
Yes. But he says it's important to choose the right problems to solve.
Wait, Right problems? What do you mean?
He makes a distinction between what he calls good and bad values.
Oh, okay, I'm listening. This sounds like a game changer.
So think about honesty, for example.
Okay, honesty.
It's a good value because it's grounded in reality.
You can control it, right? You choose to be honest or not.
Exactly. Now think about popularity.
Ooh, popularity.
That's often based on external stuff.
You can't control whether people like you or not.
Exactly. So it's a bad value to chase, according to Manson.
Because it leads to unsolvable problems.
Which just create misery. He uses these two musicians as examples.
Musicians. Okay, tell me more.
Dave Mustaine from Megadeth and Pete Best, the original Beatles drummer.
Okay, I'm familiar with them.
Mustaine, he was super successful with Megadeth.
Yeah, huge band.
But he was always comparing himself to Metallica.
His old band.
And that's a recipe for unhappiness, you know?
It's like setting yourself up for failure.
No matter how much you achieve.
Because you're always measuring yourself against someone else's yardstick.
Right. On the flip side, you have Pete Best.
The guy who got kicked out of the Beatles right before they made it big.
Talk about rough timing.
Right.
But he actually ended up finding happiness.
Really?
Through family and a more simple life.
That's kind of amazing.
He said he was happier than I would have been with the Beatles.
Wow, that's powerful.
It shows that you can choose what to give a feck about.
And sometimes choosing what seems like the less glamorous path can actually lead to more happiness.
What resonates with you so far?
You know, I'm realizing I stress a lot about external validation.
Like what?
Career success, social media, stuff like that.
It's easy to get caught up in that stuff.
It is. I'm wondering if I'm chasing the wrong things, those bad values.
It's a common trap. But Manson offers a tool to break free. Saying no.
How does no fit into all of this?
He talks about his time in Russia where he was surprised by their honesty.
Like brutally honest.
Yeah. At first he thought it was rude.
I can see how that could be jarring.
But then he realized it was just their way of communicating.
Just being direct.
Unadulterated expression.
And it was liberating for him, right?
Totally. Because it freed him from trying to please everyone all the time.
Interesting.
Manson says being able to say no is key to setting boundaries.
And staying true to yourself.
Exactly. Have you ever been in a situation where saying no helped you?
You know, I can't think of a specific instance, but I like the idea of...
Of what?
As a way to affirm your values, even when it's hard.
It takes courage, but it can be so worth it.
All right, so we've got the feedback loop from hell, the usefulness of suffering, and the power of no.
We're just getting started. Manson has a lot more to say about it.
Oh, I know. I can't wait to hear what else he's got up his sleeve.
Well, next up, he talks about something he calls the do something principle.
Do something principle. Okay, I have all ears.
He says sometimes motivation follows action. You don't wait for inspiration.
You just start doing, even if you don't feel like it.
Exactly.
It's like that saying, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step.
Yes, and sometimes we get so stuck in planning or thinking that we never even take that first step.
Oh, I know that feeling. Analysis paralysis.
Right. But the idea is you can actually create your own motivation through action.
So it's not about waiting for the perfect moment or feeling inspired. It's about just starting.
Think of a small action step you could take today, even if it seems insignificant.
You know what? I've been putting off writing a blog post because I get stuck in planning mode.
What if you just committed to writing for 30 minutes today, even if it's a rough draft?
Yeah, you're right. Just get something down on paper. That's a great idea.
There you go. That's the do something principle in action.
I already feel more motivated just thinking about it.
It's a powerful tool.
This conversation is making me rethink how I approach, well, pretty much everything. But I have a feeling Manson's about to take us even deeper.
He does. Next up, he talks about something that can be both uncomfortable and liberating. Death as a guiding principle.
Whoa, okay. We're getting existential now.
This is where things get really interesting.
I'm ready.
Manson shares a story about his friend Josh, who died in a tragic accident.
Oh, wow.
And how that loss impacted his own views on life and death.
Yeah, it definitely makes you think about what truly matters.
Because it reminds us that life is finite.
We're not here forever.
And that can be a powerful motivator to live more intentionally.
So how does this tie into our values and giving effect?
Well, Manson connects this to the work of Ernest Becker,
okay,
who explored the concept of death terror.
Death terror, like the fear of death.
Exactly. And Becker argues that this fear drives us to create these immortality projects.
Like what?
Things like religion, art, building businesses.
Even having children.
Yeah. It's all about trying to leave a legacy, to transcend our own mortality.
It's fascinating, but also kind of terrifying when you think about it.
Because it suggests that we're all running from the reality of our own death.
Trying to distract ourselves from the inevitable.
And Manson challenges us to question those immortality projects.
To ask ourselves if they're truly aligned with our values.
Or if they're just driven by fear.
So instead of trying to achieve immortality through our achievements, we should focus on living a meaningful life in the present moment.
He believes that confronting our mortality can actually be freeing.
In what way?
It allows us to detach from those projects that are driven by fear or ego.
And instead, focus on values that are genuinely meaningful.
Wow.
I need a minute to process all of that.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in. Let's pause here. We'll pick up this conversation about death, values, and the subtle art of not giving a feck in part 2.
Okay, yeah, that was a lot to digest.
It is heavy stuff, right? Death is a guiding principle.
It really makes you think about what you're living for.
For sure. But remember, Manson's not saying we should all become nihilists.
Right, it's not about giving up.
It's about being more intentional.
Yeah, about choosing your values carefully.
And recognizing that death, well, it's inevitable.
We can't escape it.
But that can be a good thing.
Okay, how so?
Because it helps us let go of those things we do out of fear.
Like those immortality projects.
Exactly. And focus on what truly matters to us, not our ego.
So does he give us any advice on how to actually choose those better values?
He does. He talks about defining our values based on what we're willing to struggle for.
Interesting. So it's not about seeking comfort.
It's about embracing the challenge.
Okay, I like that.
He uses the analogy of running a marathon.
Oh, I get it. You don't just show up and run 26 miles, right?
Right. There's training, pushing yourself, discomfort.
It's about the journey, not just the destination.
And the satisfaction comes from overcoming those challenges.
That makes sense. When I was learning guitar, my fingers ached so much.
I bet.
I wanted to quit so many times, but I stuck with it.
And now you can play.
And it's so rewarding.
Exactly. It's the same with our values. The things we're willing to struggle for, those become the most meaningful.
You earn them. You don't just wish for them.
He also talks about choosing values that are, aligned with reality.
And within your control.
Those good values we talked about, remember?
Yeah, honesty, self-respect, those internal things.
You can cultivate those no matter what's happening around you.
Right, as opposed to, say, wealth or fame.
Which are often influenced by things outside of your control.
It's like that serenity prayer.
Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the courage to change the things I can.
Manson's saying, focus your energy where it matters.
And let go of the things you can't control.
It's empowering, isn't it?
It is. Especially coming from a book called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Feck.
Right. It's not about being careless. It's about choosing your battles wisely.
And taking responsibility for the ones you choose.
He talks a lot about that, taking responsibility.
But does he mean like blaming ourselves when things go wrong?
It's more about acknowledging our role even when things aren't our fault.
So there's a difference between fault and responsibility.
Exactly. He gives this analogy.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine you wake up one morning and there's a baby on your doorstep.
A baby.
Okay.
You didn't put it there. It's not your fault.
But it's there.
And now it's your responsibility. You have to make choices.
And those choices have consequences.
Right. Life throws us curveballs, but we always have a choice in how we respond.
And those choices are shaped by our values.
He tells this crazy story about Meredith Moran, a writer.
Oh, yeah, I think I read that excerpt.
She recovered this repressed memory of being abused by her father.
That's awful. I can't even imagine.
But years later, she realized she had actually invented the memory.
Invented it? You mean it didn't happen? It never actually happened. Manson talks about how our brains can create false narratives.
Based on our current beliefs and feelings.
Right. She was going through a tough time researching child abuse, and her brain just filled in the blanks.
Wow. I don't even know what to say.
It shows how powerful our minds are.
And how we can be wrong about things, even really important things.
And Manson says being wrong is actually a good thing.
It's how we learn.
We have to be open to new information, even when it challenges our beliefs.
It's about humility and curiosity.
He even compares personal growth to a scientific process.
Okay, I like this.
Our values are our hypotheses.
Our actions are the experiments.
And the results are the data.
That's a great way to think about it.
It takes the pressure off having to be right all the time.
Mistakes become feedback, part of the process.
And that process involves choosing values that are based on, your own internal compass.
Not on what other people think.
Like Mustaine and Best, remember?
Yeah, one chose external validation, the other chose something more internal.
And it's up to us to define what success means.
Okay, my brain is officially full.
Take a deep breath. there's more.
Bring it on. I'm ready for the final layer. All right, let's jump back in. Where did we leave off?
We were talking about the importance of saying no.
Right. Setting boundaries, all that.
But it's also about trust.
Okay, how so?
Manson talks about how in Russia they're super direct, even blunt.
Yeah, I remember that. He found it kind of jarring at first.
Because in many cultures, we're taught to be polite even when we disagree.
Avoid conflict.
But in Russia, they just lay it all out there.
Radical transparency.
And Manson realized that it was actually a really powerful way to build trust.
Because you always know where you stand with someone.
You're not guessing or wondering what they really think.
Makes sense. It's like instead of trying to please everyone, you just focus on being authentic.
And that can be really freeing, you know.
Totally. It's like you attract the right people into your life when you're not afraid to be yourself.
Manson says it's about quality over quantity.
In relationships and just in life in general.
By saying no to the things that don't matter, we create space for the things that do.
It's like we were saying before about those good and bad values.
Choosing to focus on the things that are truly meaningful and within our control.
So instead of trying to change the world, we change ourselves.
Exactly. We align ourselves with our values, and that can actually have a bigger impact.
It's like putting the Serenity Prayer into practice.
Accepting the things we can't change, and having the courage to change the things we can.
And Manson takes this even further with the idea of boundaries.
Not just in relationships,
but in all areas of life.
He uses this interesting example, Romeo and Juliet.
Wait, Romeo and Juliet? I thought that was a classic love story.
It is. But Manson suggests that Shakespeare might have intended it as a satire.
Really?
A warning about what happens when passion and impulsivity go unchecked.
I never thought of it that way, but it kind of makes sense when you consider how quickly their love turns tragic.
He argues that healthy love actually requires boundaries, self-respect, open communication.
So it's not about losing yourself in the other person.
It's about two whole individuals coming together.
It's like you can't pour from an empty cup, right?
Yeah.
You have to take care of yourself first.
And setting boundaries is a crucial part of that self-care.
Knowing when to say no.
Even walking away from relationships that aren't healthy.
This is making me rethink some of my own relationships, for sure.
I think we all have those moments of people-pleasing.
Definitely.
But Manson reminds us that saying no is an act of self-respect.
And that can actually make our relationship stronger.
Because when we honor our own needs, we create a more solid foundation for trust.
Which is essential in any relationship, romantic or otherwise.
And he points out that rebuilding broken trust takes more than just words.
It's about changing your behavior.
Showing through your actions that you've learned from your mistakes.
He used that analogy of a china plate.
Right, break it once, maybe you can repair it.
But keep breaking it. And eventually it's beyond repair. Wow, this has been quite the deep dive. Manson's ideas are really thought-provoking.
He definitely challenges us to look at things differently.
And he does it in a way that's both entertaining and insightful.
It's like he's giving us permission to question everything we thought we knew about happiness and success.
Relationships, death, you name it.
And to define those things for ourselves based on our own values.
So, if we had to boil all of this down to one key takeaway from The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Feck, what would it be?
I think it's about choosing what to care about.
With intention.
And having the courage to let go of the things that don't align with those values.
It's about embracing our imperfections, our limitations.
And finding meaning in the messiness of life.
It's really empowering when you think about it.
It is. It's a reminder that we have more control over our experience than we often realize.
We get to choose what we give a feck about.
And those choices shape our reality.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Feck.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
I don't know about you, but I'm feeling inspired to reevaluate my own values.
And to start giving fewer frecks about the things that don't really matter.
To all our listeners out there, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep choosing what to give a feck about.